grandmother had a mortar and pestle that she used every single morning. Not for ceremony, not for show, just grinding. Before the sun was fully up, before anyone else in the house was awake, she was already at it. Ground nuts, seeds, dried leaves, things that came from the garden or the market or somewhere I never completely tracked. And when I was young, I thought that was just what grandmothers did, part of the ritual of being old, part of the ritual of being Ugandan. I never asked why she used Moringa instead of the packaged vitamins that had started showing up in shops. I never asked why everything was fermented or why the porridge was always made from millet instead of the maize flour that was faster and cheaper. I just ate what I was given, like children do. But here's what I know now, that I didn't know then. She was right about all of it. Not vaguely right, not there might be something to this right. Scientifically, measurably, demonstrably right. And science has spent the last 50 years slowly, expensively catching up to what she already knew. This is Explain It Like I'm from Uganda. I'm Tobias. And today we're talking about food, about kitchens, about knowledge that got dismissed as old-fashioned for decades, only to come back wearing labels like superfoods, functional nutrition, and gut microbiome diversity. Your grandmother didn't need a journal. She just needed a mortar and pestle. Let's get into it. One thing that gets overlooked in these conversations is this. African food traditions are not simple. They are not primitive. And they are definitely not just people eating whatever happened to be available. These food systems are the result of thousands of years of observation, experimentation, and accumulated knowledge passed down across generations. The difference between traditional knowledge and laboratory science was never the quality of the observation. It was the language used to describe it. Your grandmother didn't say, "This food contains probiotic bacteria that improve gut health and strengthen immune function." She said, "Eat your porridge, it's good for your stomach." Same observation, different vocabulary. And for a long time, only one of those ways of speaking was taken seriously. Think about fermentation. Across Africa, from east to west, communities developed fermented foods independently, and for many of the same reasons. Preservation, yes, but also flavor, and as it turns out, nutrition. Ogi in Nigeria, injera in Ethiopia and Eritrea, fufu in parts of West and Central Africa, uji in East Africa, togwa in Tanzania, maheu in Southern Africa. Different names, different grains, same basic process. You soak the grain, let it ferment, then cook it. And somewhere in that process, something happens that nobody in the village needed a scientific paper to explain. The food becomes easier to digest, more nutritious. Compounds that block mineral absorption start breaking down. Beneficial bacteria multiply, and your stomach feels better. Science confirmed this recently with expensive equipment, published studies, and clinical trials. Your grandmother confirmed it centuries ago with a clay pot and patience. In 2010, researchers compared the gut microbiomes of children in rural Burkina Faso with children in Florence, Italy. The children in Burkina Faso were eating traditional diets rich in millet, sorghum, fermented foods, and high-fiber plant-based meals. The Italian children were eating a modern Western diet with more processed foods and refined carbohydrates. The difference was dramatic. The African children had far more diverse gut microbiomes. including bacteria associated with protection against obesity, diabetes, inflammatory bowel disease, and certain cancers. The Italian children, despite living in one of the world's most celebrated food cultures, had significantly less microbial diversity. Then in 2024, researchers published a study in Nature Medicine comparing an African heritage diet with a Western diet. The African diet included green vegetables, legumes, plantains, root crops, millet, sorghum, and fermented foods. Nothing exotic, nothing expensive, just traditional food. When participants switched to the African heritage diet, inflammatory markers dropped, gut microbiome health improved, and chronic disease risk indicators decreased. When participants switched to the Western diet, the opposite happened. And here's the part that really stays with me. Another 2024 study looked at the Jew/Hwansi hunter-gatherers of southern Africa, one of the oldest continuous human populations on Earth. Researchers found bacterial species in their gut microbiomes that are almost completely absent in Western populations. Not rare, absent, gone. These were microbial species humans evolved alongside over hundreds of thousands of years, species connected to immune health, metabolism, and protection against chronic inflammation. The researchers describe them as microbial species lost in Western populations. Lost, not discovered. Lost. There's a difference. Let me make this more personal. Think about your grandmother's kitchen, or your mother's, or your auntie's, because what was happening in those kitchens was far more sophisticated than people gave it credit for. Take Moringa. In many Ugandan homes, Moringa was just that tree in the compound. The leaves got dried, crushed into powder, mixed into sauces, or added to meals. Nothing fancy. Now, Moringa is sold in health shops in London and New York as a premium superfood, which would probably confuse anyone who grew up with a moringa tree in their backyard. Scientifically, though, the plant is remarkable. Moringa contains proteins, vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, and compounds linked to anti-inflammatory and anti-diabetic effects. Research has connected it to benefits for obesity, ulcers, asthma, and more. A 2023 scientific review described it as a medicinal plant with broad therapeutic potential. Your grandmother just called it the leaves and put it in your food. Then there's fermented porridge. Across East Africa, fermented millet or sorghum porridge has been a traditional breakfast for generations. Thin, slightly sour, not particularly impressive to look at. For years, many Western nutrition experts encouraged people to move away from those foods toward packaged cereals and formula products that were considered more modern and advanced. But now we know something important. The fermentation process breaks down compounds called anti-nutrients, things like phytates and tannins that block the body from absorbing minerals like iron, zinc, and calcium. So the traditional porridge wasn't just feeding the child, it was helping the child actually absorb the nutrients in the food. The packaged alternative often skipped that entire process. It looked more advanced, but nutritionally it could be less effective. And then there's seasonal eating. Traditional African diets changed throughout the year. What people ate in the rainy season differed from the dry season. Different vegetables, different grains, different preparation methods. That wasn't backwardness, that was diversity. Modern science now shows that seasonal dietary changes help maintain a more diverse and adaptable gut microbiome. The Western diet tends to do the opposite. The same processed foods all year round. High sugar, low fiber, minimal variation. And over time, gut diversity declines. Researchers studying the Hadza people of Tanzania found clear seasonal shifts in their gut microbiomes that directly matched seasonal changes in diet. Scientists found that fascinating. Traditional communities found it normal. Now here's where things get complicated. From the 1960s through the 1990s, many African countries experienced a huge push toward dietary modernization. Whole grains got replaced with refined flour. Millet and sorghum were replaced with white rice and processed foods. Infant formula was marketed as more modern and superior to traditional feeding practices. Part of this shift came from convenience. Processed foods saved time, especially for women balancing households and work. Part of it came from social pressure. Western foods became associated with education, wealth, and modernity. And part of it came from aggressive marketing by global food companies. One of the clearest examples was Nestlé's infant formula campaign in Africa during the 1970s. The marketing was so controversial, it sparked a global boycott. The issue wasn't just that formula was nutritionally inferior to breast milk in many cases. It was also that mothers in communities without reliable clean water were mixing formula with contaminated water, leading to deadly infections. And because formula was expensive, families sometimes diluted it to make it last longer, leaving infants malnourished. Traditional feeding practices were often safer, healthier, and free. The modern alternative cost lives. Now, this doesn't mean every traditional food practice was perfect. Hunger existed. Nutritional deficiencies existed. Food insecurity was real. There's nothing romantic about poverty. But there's a difference between improving traditional systems and replacing them entirely with products marketed as superior. Because in many cases, the replacements weren't better, they were worse. And today, many of the diseases increasing across urban Africa, obesity, type 2 diabetes, inflammatory illnesses, track closely with the shift away from traditional diets toward processed foods. Those outcomes are not random, they are connected, and honestly, there's something almost funny about where we are now. Moringa is now a luxury wellness product sold in capsules and smoothie powders. Fermented foods are trendy. Kombucha, kefir, gut health drinks sold at airport cafes. African communities have been drinking fermented grain beverages for centuries and calling them breakfast. Sorghum and millet, once dismissed as old-fashioned, are now marketed in European bakeries as ancient grains. Which is technically true. They are ancient and they are grains. But until recently, they were also just normal food across much of Africa. Even seasonal eating has been rebranded as intuitive eating or ancestral nutrition. There are books, retreats, coaches, podcasts, entire wellness industries built around rediscovering eating patterns that African communities already practiced long before anyone gave them fashionable names. And to be clear, the science behind these ideas is real. The fermented foods really are beneficial. Moringa really is nutritionally impressive. Diverse diets really do support gut health. The science isn't the problem. The problem is forgetting where the knowledge came from. The way traditional practices get rediscovered, rebranded, and resold without acknowledging the generations of people who were already living that knowledge long before clinical trials arrived. So let's bring this back home. Your grandmother's kitchen wasn't just a place of routine. It was a place of accumulated wisdom, a place that understood, even without scientific vocabulary, that fermentation supports digestion, that moringa nourishes the body, that seasonal eating creates balance, and that how you prepare food matters just as much as the food itself. She didn't have the terminology, she had the practice, and the practice worked. Study after study is now confirming what African food traditions understood through lived experience over centuries. In 2025, Nature Medicine published research showing that African heritage diets reduced inflammation, improved gut microbiome diversity, and lowered markers linked to chronic disease. One of the world's top medical journals confirming your grandmother. So the next time someone says African food is backward, unscientific, or outdated, you can tell them the science finally caught up. It just took a few decades. And if your grandmother is still alive, go sit in her kitchen, not out of nostalgia, out of curiosity. Ask her why she cooks the way she does. You might hear an answer that sounds simple, and then years later you might read the same thing in a scientific journal. That's episode 6 of Explain It Like I'm From Uganda. I'm Tobias. New episodes every Saturday. And if you know someone who once looked at traditional African food and thought, that doesn't seem scientific, share this episode with them. Tell them Nature Medicine says hello.